Welcome to Media Mac. This is Dr. Shermak here on a week 9 episode as we continue through the semester. And today we're going to be talking about the behemoth that I feel like has come up in almost every other discussion we've had throughout the semester and throughout these last several episodes, and that is television. Television, all right? So if you think a little bit about the context here with television, we've talked about how television has had an impact on magazines, radio, newspaper, books, movies, right? Everything. So television came in and became this sort of massively disruptive form of media. And before the internet arrived, it was sort of the creme de la creme of disruptors in this media world. So now, in this modern age, we have the convergence. There's that word again. We haven't mentioned it in a while, it seems. But the convergence of television and the internet really creating some disruption and sort of disrupting. Television has been so disrupted by the internet, but the convergence has changed the way that we act as consumers. I want you to think about, as we get started today, when was the last time you watched television? All right. Like if someone asked you, like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm watching TV. There was a really good chance you weren't actually watching on TV, right? The follow-up to that question is, what did you watch it on? Was it a traditional TV set, or was it your phone? Was it your laptop? Was it your iPad while you were eating your morning cereal or whatever? There's a good chance that you watched whatever you call television on something other than an actual television. And that's really the evolution of this medium. What is television even anymore, right? What is this? And that's kind of the thread we're pulling on today and discussing, thinking about, how this has evolved, not only historically, which we get on this week, but how it has evolved personally for you. Because you've lived in a moment, whether you are 18 years old or 46 years old like me or older than that, we have all lived through a moment where television has perhaps evolved the most in its history. And at this point, it's roughly 100 years old. All right. So some of the first television sets were being created in the late 20s, but it really didn't become a mass medium until the 50s. So this idea of evolution is a big part of this episode. So let's get right into it. What is television in 2026? All right. Let's go very sort of granular here with the definition of television. The word itself, tele, is from the Greek meaning far. All right, tele is far. Visio is from Latin, meaning sight. So television actually means seeing things from a distance. It's kind of interesting. I always like to dig into the etymology of a word. So this is a 100-year-old concept, right? As I just mentioned, meaning seeing something from a distance. And think about how that has evolved so much over the years. We are not really seeing things from a distance so much with television. Television actually has become very personal in the way that we watch it, in what we see on television. I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. I read a piece a while back in Fortune magazine. It's called, it was written by a media attorney named Lynn Cherry. And Cherry wrote this piece, and she made an argument in there. She said that television is no longer a device, it's a state of mind. Sounds trippy, doesn't it? Television, state of mind. But I found this super compelling, and it made me, I agree with her argument. Because television can be anywhere now. Television is a moment. It's the moment you decide, How do I want to be carried by a story? How do I want to be maybe taken to another place? Or how do I decide, or it's the moment you decide I want to be informed, inspired. And you can do that anywhere. You can do it on the couch in front of your television set, as we've done for many years. You can do it, I don't know, in an Uber on the way somewhere. You can do it in the kitchen. You can do it in bed. It's about comfort. It's about escape. It's about curiosity, connection. And this is television in 2026 on any screen, any format, for any length of time, right? You don't have to devote yourself in these typical increments of time that we used to. It used to be 30 minutes was the minimum time we devoted, right? Or then maybe it was an hour for watching more of a drama. There's the movie of the week. That was always 2 hours. You had 30 minutes for the news. I can turn on a show for 5 minutes and pick it up later. It's called time shifting. That's been a huge part of what has changed in television viewing today. Let me give you some data. Here's sort of what we're actually doing in terms of television consumption from Nielsen. And I think, these numbers are so hard to keep up with. So the data I give you right now is going to be old next week, but let's take a look at what this is. And I feel like some of these numbers are higher. All of television viewing in the United States, streaming is 44.8% of that. Cable viewing, traditional cable viewing is down to about 24%. And broadcast, which is your over-the-air networks, is down to about 20%. I remember when I first started teaching this class, Moraine Valley Community College outside of Chicago, 2009. And those numbers were wildly different. Streaming wasn't even in there. Cable was somewhere in like the 60s. Broadcast was somewhere in the 40s. Here's what's changed so dramatically. And this goes back to what I mentioned just a moment ago about time, about it being a state of mind, about us viewing anywhere we want, when we want. When you ask people, I'm watching TV, 12.5% of those folks mean watching YouTube. Watching YouTube. And that has blown up the television model. More people consider watching TV, watching YouTube, than they do Netflix. Netflix is about 7.5% of people watching TV. Disney Plus. YouTube is more than that. Remember, YouTube is a free platform. You can buy premium, of course. It's a free platform where anyone can post a video. You can look at it right now as perhaps the biggest television network in the world. Things get even more interesting when we think about news consumption. And you know me, journalism nerd city here. I'm always thinking about news consumption. Pew Research asked folks in August of 2025, where do you get your news? They asked folks, I'm looking at my notes here, trying to read my own notes. It's sometimes a chore because I'm jotting things down real quick for the podcast. But they asked people who said they get news from television, how do they actually watch it? Where do they specifically get their news? 57% said they still get them from these traditional formats. And I think that speaks a little bit to the age of folks who are still watching television news. 34% said they stream their news on television. So it's interesting to point out that even though streaming has taken over for entertainment, most people getting TV news are still watching the old-fashioned way. When we look at that by age, adults under 50 are nearly split between streaming and old-fashioned ways. But if you look at adults 65 and older, 75% of them are still getting traditional TV for their news. Why does this matter? We're going to talk more about that in our upcoming segments. Thinking about why that TV news consumption matters and how that model is changing. Another thing this week, and you are going to look at it in your textbook and also in your discussion, is this concept of cord cutting, cutting out those traditional television. That's really important. The textbook covers that really well. Netflix really is the culprit here, right? And I sound accusatory. They changed the model. Approaching 300 million subscribers, Netflix. They just had a huge moment, which in my opinion was kind of garbage, was putting on the opening day broadcast for Major League Baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan. I watched that broadcast. It was bizarre. All right. The guy at the beginning yelling at me from the field, telling me the lineups. You had some wrestler I'd never heard of yelling at me from the field. It was a Netflix commercial. It wasn't a baseball broadcast. The NBC broadcast the following night, or on Sunday night, I can't remember which night, was a nice palate cleanser for me as a baseball fan. But I digress. Netflix created the model for television. Everyone followed that model. You had then come, things like Disney Plus, Max, HBO Max. It went through a bunch of different HBO. I remember when it was HBO Go, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Apple TV, Amazon Prime. You know these players. They all came along and offered their services. And then what you did, and I've done this too, in our household, this is what we do. You went out, you subscribe to those services. I'm lost count of the services we subscribe to. We cord cut, right? We cord cut and we jumped in when all these subscription services came out. And now when we open up we have Apple TV here at home, we open that up and we have to click on the little box for whatever we want to watch. Oh, you want to watch this show? It's on Netflix. You want to watch that show? Oh, it's on Prime. It's on Apple TV. There's irony here, isn't this? Isn't this some sort of irony? The irony here is that for all the work we did and bad-mouthing we did to cut cable, the amount we pay and the number of choices we get looks an awful lot like cable. You think to yourself, wouldn't it be nice if I had one app where I could go and I could select the shows I want to watch instantly without having to log into these apps? That's cable. This a la carte dream got really complicated really fast. And cable's not dead. Cable's around. I have what I think is kind of a version of cable. I have YouTube TV. And you know why I have YouTube TV? Sports. Sports are the only thing keeping that cable model alive. And they were what held, what kept cable on for years when streaming came into play. Live events. Live events didn't really crack streaming for several years. And what put live events on the map through streaming was Amazon. Amazon Prime's deal with the NFL, where they were broadcasting Thursday Night Football exclusively through streaming. That was the first time you actually needed a streaming subscription to watch the full slate of NFL games. And I'm an NFL junkie. All right, my team are my beloved Chicago Bears, but I will watch any NFL game. I'll watch any MLB game too. I'm the guy buying this stuff. All right, it's me. Here I am. I'm guilty. I'm the problem. It's me. Taylor Swift. yesterday, my girlfriend and I were trying to decide what to watch on a Friday night. And my team, the Cubs, had played earlier in the day, and her team, the Dodgers, had played earlier in the day. And she's like, what are we going to watch tonight? And I was like, random baseball. She wasn't having it. We ended up watching some news, and she's been into Black Rabbit on Netflix. So we watched that. I'm digressing a lot today, I know. I have so much to say about television. It fascinates me. But going back to this idea, cable was really good at live events. Streaming was not. That is changing dramatically. Hulu has live sports. You've seen that commercial a billion times. More people watch the Super Bowl. We talked about the Super Bowl a ton. More people watch the Super Bowl over streaming than they did over broadcast. Streaming is catching up on live events, and I think that is doom for traditional cable. It's been fun to live in this moment with television. I think back, every time I reflect on the media we're going to cover each week, and I prepare myself for the podcast, I think back to how my television viewing has evolved, going back to the early days of my life when I was watching television on a Zenith dial television. Yes, I've been around that long. Going back to the days when my dad, we had one of the very first VCRs. My dad paid like $600 for that VCR, and we would schedule it through this kind of analog timer to record TV shows so we could watch them later. That was time shifting in its very early form. It seems so silly now. Even a DVR seems silly now because you can queue up any show you want on demand. And I remember moving from a larger TV, a tube TV that was larger. I think our first big upgrade was to a 27-inch TV, and that was like a really big deal. And it's crazy for me to think now the TV that we have in our living room is 65 inches, and our backup TV, our spare TV that I have right behind me here in the office is 55 inches. And that at one point I paid, $1,500 for a television. We've just seen this evolution happen time and time again. I really want you to think about that this week. I want you to think about your evolution in watching television, the subscriptions you've had, the television sets you have, the way you watch television now. It's really, really interesting. So reflect on that. We're going to come up for air and take a break. When we come back, I want to dive a little bit deeper into local television. You know my passion for local media. And local television, which still holds strong for many, many people, is going through a really heavy and rapid and quite alarming change right now. Like literally a major story happened this week that I want to talk about. So let's come back. Let's do that in segment 2. I'm Dr. Shermak. You're listening to Media Mac. We will be right back.
Stay connected to your campus. The Questonian has been Cuesta College's trusted news source since 1966. From breaking news to campus life, we cover the stories that matter to you. Follow us at The Questonian on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, or visit questonian.com.
Welcome back to Media Mac, Dr. Shermak here. So happy you are along for the ride. It is our week 9 episode where we are talking about television, and there is so much to talk about. This is a very thick, very heavy, in a good way, I think, week and module and episode that we're covering television. All right, so we've established that television is changing fast. There is no disputing that, all right? And we talked about that a lot in segment 1, and we'll continue to talk about that. But I want to talk about something with television that doesn't always get a lot of attention or a lot of headlines, and that is the idea of ownership, particularly ownership related to television outlets, local outlets throughout the country. This is a democracy story. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm not trying to make this some kind of political commentary. You know what, though? I'm telling you, it is political, all right? It is. And I think for a lot of folks, it's a privilege, and I don't mean that in a good way, to just say, oh, I don't want to get into politics. This is politics. We need to talk about it. This is a democracy story. Ownership of media is a democracy story. Let me explain myself. So the FCC, that's the Federal Communications Commission, they have had a rule for decades that has said that no single company that owns television networks or television stations is the more correct term, television stations. No single company can reach more than 39% of all U.S. television households. All right. We saw what happened with radio when regulation was changed. That's starting to happen in some of the worst ways to television. That rule is in place because the ideals, all right, back in the day when the United States was pro-press, pro-media, pro-having democracy interlaced with the press, with media. That rule exists because the diversity of ownership is supposed to translate to a diversity of voices. And that translates into a better informed public. That entire idea is in jeopardy right now. It's under serious pressure. Let me give you an example that happened just this week. So there's a station in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's actually a market that I used to live in when I was a student at Indiana University in Bloomington that was in their television market. WRTV. I remember watching it often. RTV. It's an ABC affiliate. It was sold overnight to a different local broadcaster for $83 million. The next morning, after that sale, the entire newsroom was axed, gone. Reporters, anchors, producers, the meteorologists, all of them laid off at once. One of the meteorologists, the people that were laid off, his name is Todd Klassen. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He posted on Facebook that morning. He talked about, all the long hours he put in at that station, the growth he went through. He said he gave everything to that job, and all of a sudden he wakes up in the morning and he's done. It's a real person affected by this. And it goes beyond that, this consolidation. In the Indianapolis market right now, you have just two companies, who control all local television news in that city. So you have in that city, in that market, fewer owners, fewer newsrooms, and that means fewer voices in that community. And you might say, it's Indianapolis. It's one market. But there is evidence this is happening elsewhere, and it matters a lot because people value local news. Let me give you some numbers. Pew Research, they're my fave. Pew Research published a major study on Americans and local news in 2024. 85% of Americans, 85%, that's a lot of people agreeing on things. We don't do that well anymore, do we? 85% of Americans say local news outlets are at least somewhat important to the well-being of their community. At least somewhat important to the well-being of their community. That means in that group, there's probably people who think it's somewhat or very important, right? 71% of folks say that their local news reports accurately. That's a huge number. That's really impressive. There's trust there. In this age of distrust of media, 71% say their local news reports accurately. 61% say it keeps an eye on local political leaders, which is the job of journalism, the fourth estate. People value local news, and it is being consolidated. It is being ripped apart. One of the reasons why? In the same survey, only 15% paid for any local news. Now, people think, well, I'm paying my subscription to cable or I'm paying for streaming. I'm paying for it. But paying for news could be a lot of different things. It could be a subscription, a donation, so on and so forth. Here's where there's really a huge disconnect, though. %63% say their local news outlets are doing just fine financially. 63%. That is not the reality. Let me tell you, that is not the reality out there right now. Even though there is a pretty significant indicator that there is trust with local news, the share of people following local news dropped 15 points since 2016. What a year. 37% to 22%. Here's the problem. When people go away from local television news, and as we've discussed before in this class, there are news deserts in this country where there are no local newspapers. Who fills that gap? It's Facebook groups, Nextdoor, Reddit, online forums. 52% of Americans say they use those for local news. And I'm not saying there isn't some value in those, because there is. They are spaces. I think their existence is very democratic, but they're not professional. They don't have professional standards. They don't have fact checkers. They don't have people who are held to account doing reporting. In many places, it's clown college. And it's a lot of BS. Have you been on Nextdoor? My God. Have you been on Facebook? I know it skews older these days. Hop on there and scroll through things. If you make it 5 minutes, you're a better person than I am. That's filling people's gap for news. And we can take that Indianapolis story and we can scale it to a national level. Looking at the Nexstar and Tegna deal. All right. Nexstar is already the largest owner of local television stations in the country. And they are looking to acquire Tegna, which is the third largest. Combined, that would mean 265 stations in 44 of the 50 states. That means they reach 80% of all U.S. households. But wait a minute. The FCC says We have to cap that. A company can only own 39% of that reach. This is 80. Well, guess what? The FCC waived that cap and allowed the deal to happen. And Indianapolis and everything else that's happening is the result of that sort of thinking. And there's been the reporting out there that this happened at the direct request of our current president, who told the FCC, waive the cap because we need to, quote, knock out the fake news. That is as anti-American, anti-First Amendment, unconstitutional as it gets. I don't know how to say it any differently. If that's political, tough nuggets. You have a politician directing a government agency to approve a media merger for political reasons, and the agency did it? I don't care how you voted. I don't care your political alignments. That should be concerning to everyone. That's a big problem. And get this, it's a bigger problem because what does Nexstar do when it acquires another station in a market? They literally have something called the Nexstar Consolidation Playbook. They have presented this to their investors. And what happens, they go into a market, they buy a second station, they fire the staff, and then they run just one newsroom's content on both stations. Fewer journalists, the same amount of airtime. It lowers costs for them, but it reduces voices. It reduces perspective. It reduces folks who can hold people accountable. Now, when this came up, there were 8 state attorneys general who attempted to block this deal for the reasons I just shared with you. One of them is here in our state of California, New York. There were 6 others. California Attorney General Rob Bonta came out straight up and just said this merger is illegal. It's plain and simple. But it was allowed. Nexstar went ahead, closed the deal anyway. If you want to have a democratic society, you need a self-informed public. And if you're going to have a self-informed public, you need to have reliable, professional, verified, well-done local news. That's how democracy is supposed to work. That's how it's written up. It requires journalism. That's what you need for it to exist. Something really important to think about. For everyone to think about. I'm fired up. I am. I'm not going to paint a pretty picture here. Yes, it is the future of an industry in which I teach. It is the future of an industry that I'm sending folks into. But even more than that, it is the future of this country. And I care about it very deeply. This is problematic. Something to think about. Keep an eye on it. All right. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back for segment 3. I'm Dr. Shermak. You're listening to Media Mac. We will be right back.
Want real journalism experience? Join the Questonian. Build your portfolio, develop professional skills, and tell the stories that matter to our campus. Enroll in JOUR 202 or 203 for 4 credits. Questions? Email thequestonian@questa.edu. The Questonian. Your story starts here.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. Hope you're enjoying the show as we head into our third and final segment. And, I told you at the outset, this is a heavy one. There's a lot of really serious changes that are taking place in television. Some of them are kind of whimsical and interesting, and others of them are serious and highly impactful. And let's talk about another one. All right, let's talk about another one. We've talked about what is happening in television at the local level. Let's go all the way to the top, because there's a deal that's unfolding right now that, this is a big statement, but I'm going to say it. It could be the most consequential media merger in our lifetimes. All right. So Paramount Skydance, all right, which is already a company that's a result of a 2025 merger, is in the process of acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery. All right, this group is headed by Larry Ellison, who is the owner of Oracle, and his son. You can do your own research on them. I'd recommend it. The price tag for this acquisition is $111 billion with a B dollars. All right, $111 billion. And basically, what this would do, if you want to think about it this way, it would put Paramount Plus, CBS, CNN, HBO, Max, and all the Warner Brothers studio under one roof. Consolidation. One company. That to me is alarming enough. Fewer voices, less diversity of voices. It's less democratic from a democracy sense. There's another element to this deal that I think should be concerning. Paramount is drawing $24 billion with another B from Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. These include, I'm just going to read a list here, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the Qatar Investment Authority, and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. Oh, and don't forget, the Chinese tech giant Tencent has also committed an additional $1 billion in equity. This has raised eyebrows, as it should. That's a lot of foreign influence. I'm not saying all foreign is bad, but this should be scrutinized. That's a lot of foreign influence on very American products, particularly news. And you've probably seen what's happening at CBS News. You can look into that too. A group of U.S. senators, including Cory Booker, Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Dick Durbin, and others, Democrats, I'll just say it, sent a letter to the FCC demanding a full investigation. And their biggest concern, like I just mentioned, is that the investors there have a significant financial stake in the editorial decisions at major news organizations like CBS News, like CNN. CNN is the first cable news network. That's what CNN means. CBS News has been one of the most powerful television news outlets in history. The senators in this letter specifically called out the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. There's a lot of reporting out there about some problematic things he has done and said. Maybe one of the most problematic is that he's known as MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. He ordered the murder of a Washington Post journalist, if you remember this, Jamal Khashoggi, in 2018. And now he is, by proxy, investing in American media. It's not trying to be a gotcha moment. I think anyone, no matter your political leanings, should be mindful of this and considerate of this. And what's interesting, if you go back to Tencent, the Chinese company, they were pushed out of this deal before over national security concerns. But now the war with Iran, that's put financial pressure back on the Gulf nations. Tencent was brought back in to fill the funding gap when some of the Middle Eastern entities dialed it back a bit. So again, we have a deal here, a $111 billion deal for American media that includes CBS News and CNN, that is being financed in part by the governments of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and China. How did Paramount respond to this? They said that those countries' role in this is, quote, minimal, unquote. The senators have said that's not good enough. We need more. And this is an ongoing story. There's also the job side of this, right? Like thinking about, I talked about the meteorologists in Indianapolis. There's a lot of cuts coming. People involved in this deal said people are going to lose their jobs. And if you look at Hollywood overall, it's shed tens of thousands of jobs since 2022. The industry is still recovering from the 2023 strikes. Super impactful on this industry. So how does this all add up? Well, we talked about the local level where consolidation is gutting these newsrooms. And they are newsrooms that communities depend on for information. And then you have at the national level, the agencies that were designed and put in place to maintain regulation are just saying, forget it, it's fine, no big deal. 39% cap, 80% cap, bah. All at the direction of the White House. And then if you go to the very top of the food chain and look at the financial side of it, which always rules, you have maybe the biggest deal in American history as far as media goes, being financed by foreign governments with very complex interests, especially at this moment when the U.S. is engaged in a war in that region. A writer at Fortune, forgive me for, I don't have the name written down here, but has basically said that the next era of television will be decided by the best user experience. And I think in terms of entertainment, that's true. What is the best user experience? That can come down to how we navigate through apps or whatever we do with that, right? But when the product is news, that's a different beast. Local news, national news, the information we use to run the democracy, user experience can't be the only thing that matters. It's about who owns it, who funds it, whose interest it serves. Those questions determine whether journalism is actually able to do its job. So as we head towards a close today, what I want you to think about after listening and what I want you to take away from this episode as we carry ourselves through the week is that media literacy, all right, understanding of media, knowing what to consume, how to consume it, it's not just about being able to spot a deep fake video, or what kind of headlines are misleading. You also have to understand what is behind those. And that comes down to ownership structures, and it comes down to money. Every time you consume news, you need to ask yourself, who's paying for it and what do they want from it? That's being a critical consumer. And I want each and every one of you to be that. That has nothing to do with political affiliation or anything. Be a critical news consumer. All right, let's talk a little bit about what you folks in class are doing this week. So we do have a reading, our chapter 6 in media culture. It's called Television from Broadcasting to Streaming. I kind of gave you the present, the very present, what's happening right now. The textbook is going to give you more of that historical foundation, which is super important. You have a discussion this week that speaks a little bit about what we talked about at the outset of this podcast, which is called Streaming and Dreaming, thinking about your own habits and sort of what they mean for television consumption. Don't forget the quiz covers the reading, what is mentioned on this podcast, as well as a couple current event questions. I'm also going to drop Read and React 2, okay, which is sort of a amalgamation of what we've been discussing the last few weeks, asking the question to you, what will Hollywood look like in 10 years? All right, and some of this ownership stuff we talked about today will be useful there. Don't forget, there's always an Ask Me Anything board, so feel free to drop in there with questions. I'm also introducing something new this week called Going Deep. It's optional, but it's some of the readings that I do when I prep for the podcast. I'm giving you an opportunity to do those readings and look at those. So that'll be available this week, completely optional, but something new I'm doing. All right, so thank you so much for engaging. Thank you so much for thinking about this and being open to listening to different perspectives. It's super important. We need it now more than ever. I really appreciate you being here and listening. Take care of yourself and those around you. This has been Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. We will see you next week. Take care. So long, everybody.